It wasn't just a battle. It was an ending. Cannae, 216 BCE. The morning sun rose on a Roman army full of pride, 80,000 strong, seasoned commanders, young nobles eager for glory, veterans who had seen Gaul, Spain, Sicily. By nightfall, they were gone. Hannibal didn't just defeat them, he erased them. His cavalry crushed their flanks. His infantry surrounded them. The trap snapped shut like a mouth around its prey. No retreat, no surrender, just death. Blood ran thicker than the river Ophidus, bodies stacked so tightly no man could fall. Back in Rome, panic bled into fury. Parents clawed at temple doors. Senators screamed for retribution. The Republic itself trembled. And amid the chaos, they turned to a man no one cheered for. No garlands, no parades, just silence and age and a name they thought too slow for the moment. Fabius Maximus. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't promise revenge. He just looked toward the horizon and said, "If we charge now, we die with them." Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus wasn't the hero Rome wanted. He had no taste for speeches, no flair for glory. He was old, deliberate, heavy with caution. His hands bore the calluses of war, but he wore them like warnings, not trophies. The Senate gave him near total command, not out of faith, but desperation. He accepted without celebration, only a short nod, and immediately did what no Roman general before him had dared. He refused to fight. While Hannibal moved freely through Italy, sacking towns and baiting armies, Fabius stayed back. He ordered scorched earth, blocked roads, cut supply lines. He shadowed the enemy close, quiet, untouchable. Rome called him coward. Crowds mocked him in the streets. Senators whispered. His own officers rolled their eyes behind his back. But Fabius didn't flinch, because he understood something they didn't. Sometimes, saving a nation means letting go of pride. "Better scorned and alive," he said once, "than honored and buried." And so he waited. Not because he was weak, but because no one else had the strength to stand still. Fabius made war like a shadow, never striking head on, never staying in one place too long. His troops hated it. They had trained for battle, for the clash of shields and the thrill of victory. Instead, they marched through empty fields, burned their own crops, and watched from distant hills as Hannibal pillaged towns unchecked. Hannibal, for his part, saw it for what it was: strategy. And it irritated him. He laid traps. He set up ambushes. He marched deep into Roman territory, hoping to lure Fabius into a fight, but the old general never took the bait. Once, Hannibal desecrated sacred ground, thinking it would provoke him. Fabius didn't even flinch. "You think I care more for pride than the lives of my men?" he told a junior officer. "Then you still don't understand what I'm protecting. Not just soldiers, not just Rome, but time. Time for the Republic to catch its breath. Time for the rage to burn out. Time for Rome to remember that survival is a kind of victory too." And so the shadow followed the fire. The people were done waiting. In the forum, voices grew louder. "Coward!" they shouted. "He hides while Hannibal feasts." Senators echoed them, fearing elections more than enemies. Fabius's strategy starved the enemy, but it also starved Rome's ego. There were no victories to celebrate, no heroic stories to tell over wine. They wanted a lion. Instead, they got a shadow. The Senate clipped his power, assigned a reckless co-commander beneath him. His name was Minucius Young, hungry for glory and allergic to restraint. The people loved him. When Minucius won a minor skirmish, they demanded he be made equal to Fabius. Rome had never done that before. Fabius said nothing. Even when Minucius took half the army and marched straight into a trap, Fabius didn't say, "I told you so." He just marched to save him. He crushed Hannibal's ambush, pulled Minucius from the fire, and said, "We're both Romans. That's enough." The people who mocked him now owed him everything. But Fabius never demanded thanks. Only time. From his hilltop camp, Hannibal watched the land dry up, His army, once full of momentum, now strained for supplies. No fresh grain, no easy targets, just dust, smoke, and silence. And always Fabius. Never too far, never close enough to strike. A ghost in the hills, a shadow in the passes. Hannibal respected him. "He is the only Roman who understands me," he once told his officers. "And that's why he's the only one I haven't crushed." Carthaginian scouts reported how Fabius marched slow, deliberate, no wasted movement. No hunger for battle, only pressure. Day by day, Rome's armies began to act like Fabius, more careful, more measured. The fever of revenge started cooling into resolve. Even Minucius, once full of fire, addressed him as commander without irony. The war had shifted not because of one victory, but because Fabius refused to be pulled into one more loss. He fought Hannibal by refusing to become him. And Hannibal, for the first time in years, had to rethink everything. Years passed. The war dragged on, but Rome no longer bled like before. Hannibal remained, but weaker. His army thinned, his allies dwindled. He was stranded in a country that no longer feared him. Fabius had done it without a single glorious battle. And still, he wasn't celebrated. No statues, no parades, no triumphal arch. The people remembered who saved them, but they didn't like how he did it. Too quiet, too slow, too humble. Rome preferred fire. Fabius gave them patience. In the Senate, younger voices rose. One of them, Scipio, dreamed of defeating Hannibal outright, not waiting, ending. Fabius warned him, victory earned too fast often ends too soon. But Rome was done waiting. It wanted noise again. And so, once more, Fabius stepped aside. He didn't fight for power. He didn't cling to command. He just left like a man leaving a house he quietly saved from burning down. No applause, only silence. But in that silence, Rome still stood. Fabius faded from the front lines, but his shadow remained. His name still stirred resentment in some corners of Rome, especially among those who owed him most. They preferred stories with swords. But in quiet moments, his name surfaced like a steady drumbeat under louder songs. One afternoon, a boy named Tullus stood beside his father near the forum. A small statue was being unveiled, not of a warrior, but of a man with hands behind his back, head turned slightly watching. No armor, no weapons, just thought. Tullus tilted his head. "Who's that?" he asked. His father, a former legionary, smiled. "That's the one who didn't let us die." Tullus said nothing, but something about the stillness of that statue stayed with him. Rome would raise greater monuments to louder men, but none stood as still, and none stood as long. When Fabius spoke, people leaned in, not because his voice was loud, but because he never wasted it. He had learned early, silence can be heavier than steel, and restraint can shake the ground more than any march. One day, a senator rose in session to mock him. "Does the delayer still believe we can outweight Carthage into surrender?" Fabius stood slowly. The chamber hushed. He said only this, "I believe Rome should outlive her anger." Then he sat. No rebuttal, no fury, just air left heavy in the room. Later, the senator resigned his post, not out of shame but because he suddenly understood the cost of recklessness. Fabius didn't command fear. He didn't inspire chance. He simply reminded everyone what was at stake if they moved too quickly, too proudly, too soon. Some called it caution. He called it memory. Hannibal had crossed mountains, frozen rivers, entire continents to fight Rome. But what finally stopped him was a man who refused to play. Years after Cannae, Hannibal sat near a dwindling fire, staring at a half-burned map of Italy. His officers waited for plans, for orders, for fire. Instead, Hannibal whispered, "It wasn't Scipio who ruined me. It was the one who wouldn't come out and fight." He meant Fabius, the man who never stood on a battlefield against him, yet robbed him of momentum, allies, food, and time. Time, Fabius hadn't blocked his path. He had buried it in patience. And Hannibal, who had defeated charge after charge, couldn't defeat the one thing that never rushed. Rome didn't chase him out. It waited him out. And in that waiting, Fabius won a war without swinging a sword. Fabius didn't die in battle. He didn't collapse at a Senate podium or fall on his sword for Rome. He died as he lived quietly, without spectacle. Old age took him in his countryside home, far from the marble and noise. A servant found him sitting upright in a chair, cloak folded neatly, hands resting calmly in his lap. There were no last words. Only stillness. News reached Rome within days. Some paused, some nodded, some whispered. But there was no parade, no national mourning. Only a line in the Senate record: Fabius Maximus, consul, general, savior, deceased. And yet, in households across the Republic, parents told their children, "He's the reason you still have a city to wake up in." No monuments could speak louder than that. Because sometimes the man who made history move leaves without moving at all. After his death, no grand temple bore Fabius's name. But in villages once spared from fire, people remembered. In southern fields that Hannibal had passed unfought, unburned crops still grew. Children played where no bones had been buried, and old men told stories of a general who had chosen not to sacrifice them for glory. Tullus, now grown, kept a worn carving of that statue from the Forum. He set it in his workshop, above the doorway, not for display but for direction. Clients asked him once, "Why that figure? He looks like he's doing nothing." Tullus would smile. Exactly. Fabius had shown a different kind of strength. The kind that bends, absorbs, endures. He had become something rare, a leader whose absence made the world feel less steady. And while others chased victory, Fabius had preserved possibility. That was his legacy. Not what he conquered, what he kept standing. At a roadside tavern north of Capua, a veteran sat alone, stirring watered wine. His cloak was frayed, his knees stiff from old campaigns. A young soldier leaned over, recognizing the faded insignia. "You fought in the time of Hannibal?" The old man nodded. "Did you know Scipio?" "I knew of him," he said. "But I followed Fabius." The youth tilted his head. "The one who didn't fight?" A pause, a dry laugh. "Son, I'm only breathing because he didn't." Around the room, other veterans raised their cups not in toast, but in memory. Not of victory, but survival. Fabius had given them no triumph to march behind, no songs. Only birthdays, harvests, and time enough to become old men in dusty taverns. And somehow, that was more sacred than any parade. He had given them what war rarely does: a future. In a hill town untouched by Hannibal's march, a fig tree bloomed near an old well. Locals called it the waiting tree. They didn't remember why. No plaque, no tale, just the name passed down like a superstition. But under its shade, elders gathered in summer. Young lovers whispered beside it, and the townspeople said it never died, no matter how harsh the drought. A scribe from Rome once asked an old woman why they called it that. She shrugged. "Because someone once chose not to burn this place." No trumpet ever played for that decision. But the soil still gave. The roof beams still held. The children still laughed. And in a world that honors statues and slogans, here was a monument that needed no marble. A tree that stood because a man once didn't move. Fabius had disappeared from maps, but in the shadows of fig leaves she endured. In a farmhouse outside Beneventum, a boy found a clay jar buried beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, old nails, a broken brooch, and a single bronze coin green with age. On one side, a worn profile, no laurel crown, no sword, just a name nearly rubbed away: Fabius. He ran to his grandfather. Was he a king? The old man shook his head. No, just someone who knew when not to be one. That coin, worth nothing now, stayed on the mantle for decades, not because of what it could buy, because of what it represented. A man who measured value in lives spared, not enemies slain. In homes like that one, where history didn't visit often, Fabius was never a headline. But he was the reason the roof still stood, and the reason children could ask about the past, instead of being buried under it. Rome eventually won the war. Scipio faced Hannibal at Zama. Trumpets blared, swords clashed, history cheered. But Fabius wasn't there. Too old, too forgotten. His name wasn't etched into the spoils. He received no laurel, no feast, no poem. Victory had come wearing someone else's face. But in the stillness after the battle, a few senators remembered. Had Fabius not bought us years, one said quietly, we'd have had no sons left to send. Victory didn't begin at Zama. It began when Fabius said, not yet. When he chose fields over fury. When he bought time with silence. When he turned survival into strategy. And while the Republic toasted its final triumph, a single candle was lit at his family tomb. No crowd. Just one flame. And the sound of wind moving through stone. Sometimes the most important battles end before anyone realizes they began. Among a bundle of records in the Senate archives sat a sealed parchment, unopened, unsigned. It was addressed simply, to the one who made patience a weapon. Historians never agreed who wrote it. Some say it came from a junior officer. Others say it was Minucius himself, years after their clash and reconciliation. Inside were only a few lines. We mocked you. We needed you. You saved us. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see that. The letter was never delivered. But someone, somewhere, believed it needed to exist. Like a monument too fragile for marble, too soft for politics. Fabius would never have asked for it. Would have shrugged it off, probably. But even shadows deserve a light that remembers them. And in that quiet envelope, tucked beneath centuries of louder stories, was the voice of a nation finally whispering thanks. Centuries later, in a Rome filled with carriages and chimneys, a schoolboy sat on a stone bench near the ruins of the old Senate. He was tired of history lessons. The dates blurred. The names all sounded the same, bloody, loud, proud. Beside him sat an old gardener, trimming a fig tree that clung to cracked marble. The boy asked, were any of them not awful? The gardener paused. There was one. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He waited. Did he win? A smile. You're sitting on the bench he saved. The boy looked down. The stone was plain, weathered, nothing glorious. But somehow, it felt heavier now. He didn't remember the man's name, not that day. But years later, when he taught his own children, he said, there was once a Roman who didn't want to be a hero. And that's why we're still here. Tourists walk over him now. Their feet echo through ancient corridors, eyes fixed on the grand columns and war monuments. They photograph Caesar. They quote Cicero. They cheer for names carved deep in stone. But beneath their steps, under layers of dust and time, lie the worn paths of someone else. Fabius left no grand phrases, no conquering legions. Just decisions. Tiny, deliberate, repeated until Rome had a future again. One guide, old and tired of the noise, sometimes paused by an unmarked patch of ruin. Here, he'd say softly, is where patience outlived pride. Few listened, but now and then someone stayed back, just one. And while the others moved on to louder stories, they stood there silent, listening to the quiet hum beneath the stones. That hum wasn't glory. It was gravity, the kind only left by those who held up the world without needing the world to notice. When Rome burned with anger, he cooled it. When it trembled with fear, he anchored it. He was never the wind, he was the weight that held the ship. Fabius Maximus, the delayer. They mocked the name at first, cunctator, the hesitator, the one who stalled. But storms don't ask for speed. They ask for something that doesn't break. He outlived the loud ones, not because he was stronger, but because he bent when others broke. Even the marble that crumbled with time couldn't erase the shape of the space he held. No empire lasts forever. No statue stands untouched. But every civilization that survives has one thing in common. At least once, someone chose not to run, not to charge, not to shout, but to hold, and hold, and hold, until the world could breathe again. Long after Rome fell, others rose. Empires with cannons, with muskets, with machines. Each believed they would never crumble. Each faced their Cannae. And in dusty libraries, generals and scholars stumbled across the same old name. Not in glory rolls. In footnotes. Fabius. They studied his campaign not for victory, but for survival. During the American Revolution, Washington read about him. So did Churchill, in the dark days of London. So did any leader who needed to buy time instead of take it. Fabius had become something rare. A strategy, a verb, an idea. Not a blueprint for winning. A blueprint for not losing when everything else is on fire. The man who waited became the map others used. When rushing meant ruin, and though his body turned to dust centuries ago, his caution kept crossing borders. Quietly, as always. It's easy to picture Fabius on a battlefield. Harder to picture him alone at night. No maps, no messengers, just oil lamp shadows flickering across his face, and the silence of thousands of lives hanging on a single decision not yet made. Waiting isn't passive. It's excruciating. Every hour without action was a gamble. Every messenger could bring news of another town burning or another child spared. And no one thanked him for the hours he chose to hold still. That kind of leadership ages a man faster than war. Because in war, at least there's noise. In waiting, there's only the echo of doubt. Did I wait too long? Did I lose Rome by saving it slowly? But every morning he rose. Not because he was sure, but because Rome still stood. And sometimes that had to be enough. Rome sang songs of swords, of conquest, of men who charged into enemy lines and died with their names on banners. But no song was written for a shield. No verse for the man who didn't advance, who held the line, who caught the chaos so others didn't have to. Fabius was that shield. He absorbed the hatred of his people, the scorn of his peers, the bait of his enemy. He bore it all not because he wanted to be loved, but because he wanted Rome to outlive love and hate both. And when the war ended, he wasn't the one they cheered, but he was the reason there were still voices left to cheer at all. Some heroes swing swords. Others take the blow that would have shattered everything, and never ask to be remembered for it. You won't find Fabius in many classrooms. He's not as thrilling as Caesar, not as tragic as Brutus, not as romantic as Antony. His victories weren't loud enough. His failures weren't dramatic enough. But in times of chaos, when fires creep toward foundations, when noise drowns out reason, it's not Caesar they remember. It's the one who waited. Fabius teaches nothing flashy. Just this. Hold the line. Burn your pride if it buys time. Lose today to keep tomorrow breathing. His story isn't for the glory chasers. It's for the quiet builders, the calm voices in the storm, the ones who bear ridicule because they see a little farther. Fabius isn't easy to admire, but he's essential to survive. And every time history cracks, someone has to pick up his lesson. And wait, this story isn't just about Rome. It's about anyone who's ever stood still when the world screamed at them to move. The parent who stays calm when everything falls apart. The leader who chooses a slower path no one claps for. The worker who holds their integrity while others cut corners and run. You won't get parades. You'll get questions, doubts, mockery. But somewhere in the silence, between the panic and the noise, your choice to wait, to breathe, to hold will matter. You'll never know what disaster you prevented, what chain reaction you quietly stopped. And maybe no one will thank you. But the city still stands. The roof still holds. And a future, however fragile, still waits on the other side. That's what Fabius gave. That's what you might be giving, without even knowing it. History rarely wants people like Fabius. It craves drama, bold charges, martyrs and monsters. But every few generations, it needs a Fabius, someone to choose patience over panic, to sacrifice applause for survival, to lead without dragging others into ruin just to be remembered. Rome didn't love him. It tolerated him, until it realized too late that he had saved its soul. Had anyone else held command after Cannae, Rome would have bled itself dry trying to feel strong. But Fabius made her endure. Not proudly, not beautifully, but long enough to find her breath. Sometimes the difference between collapse and continuity is one quiet man who refuses to be rushed. Not because he's brave, but because he knows what breaks when you're not. At Cannae, 80,000 Roman soldiers died. It was the bloodiest day in Roman history. And yet Rome survived. Not because of what happened that day, but because of what happened after. Fabius stepped into the void, not with fire, but with restraint. He didn't avenge Cannae. He outlasted it. When others looked at the field and saw only death, he saw something else, a line that must never break again. So he made his whole life a line, between rage and reason, between disaster and recovery, between Rome as it wasn't, Rome as it could still be. Cannae was a graveyard. Fabius turned it into a warning. Not every loss needs revenge. Some losses just need someone strong enough not to make them worse. You may never face an invading army. You may never be asked to save a republic. But you'll face days when everything begs you to act fast, lash out, run forward, break something just to feel like you're moving. And on those days, you'll remember the man who didn't. You'll remember that sometimes the strongest move is not moving. That holding the line, waiting through the panic, is its own kind of courage. Fabius won no great battle, but he taught the world a lesson that outlived every victory. Survival is strength. Stillness is power. And time, when held wisely, can be a weapon sharper than any sword. History may not call your name, but if the roof holds, if the people endure, that's enough. Rome built arches for conquerors, temples for gods, columns for voices that thundered through the forum. But Fabius? He got no golden statue, no bronze horse, just a whisper through generations. And maybe that's how he wanted it. Because statues fall, names fade. But what you protect quietly, stubbornly, without thanks, can outlast all the things built to be remembered. Somewhere, maybe in a cracked courtyard or overgrown field, a child still plays where fire never came, because a man once stood still when the world begged him not to. And if that's not a monument, what is? Every generation gets its storms. Every era has its fire, its fear, its voices shouting for blood or speed or pride. And in every generation, someone has to be the pause. Someone has to be the one who says, "Not yet," who stands in the breach, not with a sword, but with the weight of consequence in their chest. You don't have to be Fabius to carry his legacy. You just have to know that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is nothing on purpose. To see the trap and not walk into it. To see the fire and not pour oil on it. To hold the line so others don't fall. He was one man, but his choice has saved more people than any war ever could. Fabius Maximus, the delayer. The man who didn't fight the way heroes were expected to. The man who bought Rome Timano with blood, but with patience. He stood still, while others charged. He was mocked, doubted, hated, and yet held, because he understood something most never will. Victory is loud, but survival? Survival is quiet. There are no horns when you hold a city together. No medals for the fires you stopped before they started. Just life, continuing. He waited, and in that waiting he became something rare. Not the hero Rome deserved. Not the hero it wanted, but the hero it needed to outlive its own worst instincts. So if you ever wonder what real strength looks like, it looks like Fabius. Still, steady, enduring,